Welcome to Sight and Sound Bites, the bi-weekly webinar series of the Eye and Ear Foundation. I'm Heather Cronus-Danick, Senior Director of Development for Individual Giving and Corporate Partnerships. The Eye and Ear Foundation supports vision, hearing, head and neck surgery, balance, and a multitude of other issues that affect people daily. So I'm honored today to introduce someone that is absolutely fantastic. Dr. Carl Snyderman is a professor of otolaryngology, neurosurgery, and bioengineering at the University of Pittsburgh. He also received his MBA from Katz School of Business. He was a renowned skull-based surgeon, and that is a partnership between otolaryngology and neurosurgery. And he is co-director of the Skull-Based Center at UPMC. His title today is Innovation and Creativity in Surgery. Dr. Snyderman.
Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be speaking to all of you today. This is one of my favorite topics I love to talk about, and I think it's something that will be of interest to everyone. And it's not too technical. It has lessons for everybody, no matter what you do. And there I go. My disclosures, I will be talking about several companies, some of which I'm involved in, but it's not a significant conflict of interest. So, really talking about innovation and, how does surgical innovation occur and what are all the factors? So we're going to address all the W words here one by one and talk about the process. But first of all, I just want to talk about my day job. What do I do on a daily basis, pretty much? And I work in a very specialized area called cranial-based surgery. And this is at the juxtaposition of two surgical specialties, otolaryngology and neurosurgery. So here you see a patient with a tumor at the base of their brain, and it's a difficult area to reach in this border zone. And using endoscopic technologies these days, we can take many of these tumors out with a minimally invasive approach through the nasal passage. And as you can see here, complete removal. One of the big advantages, of course, is that there's no manipulation of the brain in doing so. So this is a much more effective way with better outcomes for patients. But this is most of what I do. I've been very fortunate to be at the sort of the center of the universe for this type of surgery, going way back to the early pioneers. Dr. Eugene Myers, former chair of our department, Dr. Joe Maroon, a neurosurgeon. They first collaborated together way back in the 1970s in doing skull-based surgery. That was the first one performed at UPMC. And then they had the vision of establishing a skull-based center. I was the first trainee of that skull-based center. In the group photo, you can see me in the back of the group in the white coats. And we celebrated our 25th anniversary in 2012, but I've been doing this now for over 40 years. And we've really been at the forefront of two major paradigm shifts in surgery. One was the introduction and development of open skull-based surgical approaches, in which we would do big operations to access these tumors, taking apart the face and the skull to get there. And then the second paradigm shift was the introduction of endoscopic technology, where we use a minimally invasive approach through the nose, as I already showed you, to take tumors out. I've been very fortunate to work with great teams of surgeons over the years, and you can see my current team at the bottom. And I've been the one continuous thread through all these generations of surgeons. Now, when you think about surgery, you might, think that it's like an assembly line and sort of cookie cutter operations. Everyone's the same. And certainly there are surgeons who do the same thing over and over again. But what you may not realize is that every surgery is different. And that's really one of the things I love about surgery, is that you're always problem solving. Here's a very difficult aneurysm that we're clipping through the nose. We were one of the first in the world to do this type of surgery through the nose and have the largest experience. But, these are very challenging surgeries. You never quite know what's going to happen, whether that aneurysm is going to burst, and you're going to have to make adjustments and solve new problems. Things don't always go as planned. And so you have to be ready to try something new, to problem solve, to figure out a different way of doing things. As I said, that's really one of the joys of surgery, is that you're constantly um, problem solving, trying new things, discovering new ways of doing things. Going back to the ancient Greeks, they realized that surgery is very similar to music. These are both performance arts. You know, you have both sensory and motor information, eye-hand coordination, people working together, quick reaction time. And so they had their Greek god Apollo was the god of both medicine and the arts. In particular, surgery has been compared to a jazz performance, jazz music. We have different specialists working together. They're highly interdependent on each other, making things up on the fly. You don't know how things are going to go necessarily. You don't know where you're headed to, what the outcome is going to be necessarily, but you have to be willing to take risks and trust each other. And so it's a very dynamic process. Innovation, just like music, is on a continuum. When someone repeats a musical performance, they may make very minor changes in the music. So an interpretation, but they may embellish it, do a little bit more change, introduce new elements, a variation. But sometimes it's a complete improvisation where there's really little resemblance to the original performance or work of art. And that's the way it is with surgery as well. Just an example, we were the first in the world to perform an endoscopic surgery for epilepsy. This is Dr. Gonzalez Martinez, one of the neurosurgical epilepsy surgeons. And working with him, we developed a new endoscopic approach through the sinuses that allowed us to take out part of the brain that was damaged. You can see the red circle shows the part of the brain after surgery that we removed. And this was the source of the patient's seizures. And by doing this through the sinuses, we're able to spare the normal brain that is over the surface of this area. So less damage to the brain, more effective surgery, more selective without any complications. So, you know, we're still coming up with new things, discovering new ways and better ways to do things. This is a video I took in the southern part of India on one of my medical trips, and I call this traffic jazz, and I think it's a good example of how people can work together in an unscripted situation. So here we are, I'm sitting in the back of this taxi cab wondering if this is the last trip I'll ever be on because of the drivers all over the road. You can see we have 2 lanes, but we have 4 and 5 lanes of traffic on this 2-lane road. And I'm right behind a highly inflammable truck. Everybody's jockeying for position. Even the petroleum truck is all over the road. Suffice it to say, we eventually got around the truck and had a safe trip. All right, so what is innovation? It can be defined as a process of creating value by applying novel solutions to meaningful problems. So you can see in this Venn diagram, it's a juxtaposition of value, novelty, and solutions. If innovation is the cell, then creativity is the nucleus of the cell. Creativity is any act, idea, or product that can change an existing domain, but sometimes it transforms an existing domain into something completely new. And you'll see a lot of this guy in the corner. Einstein has lots of great quotes about innovation, but creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought. Well, why do we engage in such activities? Why should we care about innovation? As Einstein said, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. And so that's how we make progress. That's how we drive things forward. And, you know, as a species, there's probably a survival advantage in having some creativity. If you look at a population of people, we vary in our risk tolerance, our interest in other things, our willingness to try new things. But within any tribe or civilization, you need those individuals who are going to explore or who are going to take chances, discover new things, because that is important knowledge that you bring back to to the tribe and perhaps provide some survival advantage, whether that's a new food source or new technology. But, there's more that drives us. It's not just seeking fame or fortune. Those are not good motivators of people. And especially when you're talking about creative activities, intrinsic rewards are the most motivating. So things that we find internally rewarding, paying somebody more money to do a better job often has the opposite effect on performance. And so you want to look for activities that have their own intrinsic rewards. Well, who are the great medical innovators? This is one person's selection that I found on the internet. You can see our own Thomas Starzl from UPMC is in the center, and some of these other luminaries you may recognize. I can't find my picture up there yet, but hopefully it'll be there one of these days. Well, what do they have in common? This is a fascinating book by David Galenson, an economist, and he looked at people who were geniuses or great innovators within a variety of disciplines, across all disciplines. And he could divide them into conceptual innovators and experimental innovators based on when they did their seminal work. And conceptual innovators do their best work when they're young. These are people that we consider the typical geniuses who have these big light bulb or eureka moments where they have a great idea and they're forever known for that one great idea. And shown here is the Vietnam War Memorial, which I always find very emotionally touching. And this was designed by Maya Lin at the age of 23. And so it's remarkable the accomplishments that people perform at very young ages. In contrast, we have experimental innovators. These are people who sort of plod along and don't necessarily know where they're going to end up, and they're constantly experimenting, getting better, and they do their best work at a later age. And you can see the painter Paul Cézanne. He never considered many of his paintings to be finished, and so he left them unsigned because they were always a work in progress. Frank Lloyd Wright, Falling Water is just outside Pittsburgh, and that's his seminal work, and he didn't do that till age 70. So the lesson there is it's never too late. So if we can compare these two types of innovators, you can see that there are some differences between them. The conceptual innovator has this sudden inspiration like Einstein, whereas the experimental innovator it's a more gradual progression. So it's the young genius versus the old master. Great experimental innovators may add substantive content to a discipline, while great conceptual innovators may completely change the domain overnight. And so the Greek poet Archilochus compared that to the fox and the hedgehog. The fox is the experimental innovator. Fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And so if I look at my own area of work in skull-base surgery, we really have a mixture of both these concepts. There have been some conceptual moments when there was a paradigm shift, a sudden transition to open skull-base surgery and then endoscopic and nasal skull-base surgery. But within each of these eras, you have experimental innovation, slow building on what's come before, gradually improving the process, developing new surgical approaches. Here's one that we developed just a few years ago that's been widely adopted already. Is there a creative personality that's associated with the innovators that I've talked about so far? Well, it may be that this is something we develop, may not be born with this expertise. It may develop during a critical period of our development in childhood. And if you grew up in my era as a baby boomer, then you grew up playing with Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys. I spent a lot of time doing puzzles. And maybe that was important in my development as a surgeon. Maybe it helped me develop certain visual spatial skills or problem-solving abilities that have made me more creative. And then we have the more modern era, of course, growing up with electronics, and that may develop a different set of skills. There's some concern that it actually may limit creativity because there isn't the same hands-on experience with materials. This is an interesting book by Adam Grant, looking at people who have achieved great things, looking at Nobel Prize winners. You can see that there's an overwhelming prevalence of an artistic hobby, in particular the performing arts. So if you won a Nobel Prize, you were much more likely to be involved in performing arts than other innovators. And you see similar results when you look at entrepreneurs and other types of inventors. And this is pretty ironic. This was a rejection letter that Einstein got about his seminal theory, saying that we find your assumptions to be more artistic than actual physics. Well, that's probably a clue as to why he was able to achieve what he did. And what about a creative personality? Probably the most important thing is just a sense of curiosity. You know, that individual who's always asking why questions or wants to know more about everything. But as we'll see, there are a number of different personality characteristics that are part of the creative personality. And remember that creativity is not the same as being a genius. It's not a measure of IQ necessarily. So creative individuals have a very complex personality. They're not one thing or the other. They often have contradictory or opposing traits, as you see here. And so in different situations, they may display one or more of the other. And one thing we always want to maintain is a child's perspective. They really see the world in a different way. They haven't accumulated all the biases that we have and all the sort of the lazy mental habits that keep us from considering new ways of thinking about things. So you can see the adults in this situation are failing on getting this kid unstuck, and leave it up to him. He figured out a way. So we never want to lose that ability to see things from a child's perspective. And this also, you can look at the way someone solves problems. Are they a convergent or a divergent thinker? A convergent thinker thinks directly for a solution, quickly settles in on one solution with a omission of other possibilities. In contrast, a divergent thinker considers all the possibilities and then chooses the best one. And this is something I use in my interviews for medical students and residents. I'm looking for divergent thinkers. And so you can take common household objects such as a clothespin or a Band-Aid or a light bulb or a paperclip and ask someone, okay, tell me all the different things that you could do with a paperclip or with a spoon, and see, how many answers they can come up with. And you can actually grade the quality of their answers looking at fluency or the number of responses, flexibility, their ability to produce ideas that are different from each other, and originality, how different it is from other ideas. And so here's a test for you to see if you can be a divergent thinker. Now, this is the dead ninja puzzle, and you'll see you're the surgeon at the bottom left corner, and you're starting in that room, and your goal is to go into each of the rooms and kill the ninja and exit the whole maze in the upper right. But you can only go into each room once, and you cannot go back into a room with a dead ninja. So just give you a few seconds to think about how you might do that. And the solution is that you have to go back into the room that you started in. That's the only way you can get through the maze and get all the ninjas. And this is a very common ethical dilemma that's presented in classes where you have a runaway trolley. If you do nothing, it's going to go straight and kill 5 people. But you can divert the train onto another track and save the lives of those 5, but you are going to sacrifice one individual. So this is often used as an ethical dilemma of how would you make this, which choice would you make? And you can weight this more by saying the single individual is a young person or other factors. But here's a very creative solution that I had never thought of. And so I would say this is a good example of a divergent thinker. Well, how do we innovate? How does the creative process work? And we sort of know where we start and where we end, but what goes on in the middle isn't always apparent. But first, we have to destroy our old ways of thinking. Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. That was very obvious with Pablo Picasso's paintings. And I love this quote by Mizuta Masahide: my barn having burned down, I can now see the moon." And so, new paradigms often are adopted once the old ones die off. And you really have to jettison your old way of doing things before you can consider new possibilities. We often think that progress occurs on a nice straight timeline, but is it incremental like the fossilized prints of the dinosaurs in evolution, or is it incur in giant leaps like man's walking on the moon? In reality, there are periods of acceleration and deceleration. It's not a straight timeline. And sometimes you can't get to where you want to be unless you take a step backwards. Sometimes you have to go down a branch of a tree or go down a mountain to get to the next hill, which is higher. And that we see that a lot in medicine and surgery. So when we were at the pinnacle of what we could do with open skull-base surgery, we really couldn't do better unless we took a step back, learned how to work with the endoscope and new technology, solve new problems. But in that interim, our outcomes were actually worse. We had more complications. We had to learn how to deal with those. But eventually, we solved those problems, and we now are providing care at a much higher level than what we could do before. And oftentimes there's a lot of criticism during those early years, but you have to depend on a few brave pioneers who are willing to take those risks, or who are able to tolerate the criticism from the public in order to push things to a higher level. The creative process goes through a cycle, as you see here. There's a preparation phase, and oftentimes there's a long incubation phase where it looks like nothing is going on, but it's sort of percolating in the back of your brain. You're really thinking about it on a subliminal level, solving problems. And then you may have a sudden insight that allows you to test something, try something new, evaluate it, and then you can build on that, elaborate, and then the process starts all over again with another incubation period and new insights. So it's an iterative process, constantly improving. But you need a certain foundation to innovate. You need a base of knowledge. You can't look everything up on the computer. You have to have some internal knowledge, and you need some basic technical skills. As Charlie Mingus, the jazz musician, said, you can't improvise on nothing. You got to improvise on something. And so there have been some great studies looking at the characteristics of innovators. What are the catalysts for innovation? And I created my own little mnemonic to help me remember these five key catalysts, quone. The first one is questioning. Always asking questions about, why do we do it this way? Is there a better way to do this? How could we do this differently? And then observation, being a keen observer of what's going on around you. Once again, looking at the world through a child's eyes, looking for associations or links between different things. How could they work together? How do they interact with each other? Networking with other individuals, learning about other disciplines, seeing what others have already done, learning about new things, new ways of doing things by understanding how other people are solving problems. And finally, experimenting, doing little experiments to see what works and what doesn't work. And so you can keep building on those experiments. So we can all be better observers. When you look at this, what do you see? Do you see a cow looking at you? So on the left side, there's a cow's head. And so there's fascinating research showing that you can actually train people to be better observers. And Amy Herman has a great book. She is an art historian and lawyer, but she trains people to study art to make them better observers of things in real life. And this has been done extensively with people in law enforcement to make them better at reading crowds, recognizing a problem before it occurs. But I think we can apply the same things to medicine. She's trained medical students as well to make them better observers of patients, sort of training them to be like a Sherlock Holmes and detect things that wouldn't be obvious to the casual observer. We know that sometimes innovation occurs in the most creative of environments. I've been very fortunate to spend my whole career at UPMC, and this really was the ideal environment for what I've achieved. These things could not have happened elsewhere, and I think that's why Pittsburgh has been a leader in skull-base surgery for the last 4 decades. I was in a department that had great mentorship, freedom from dogma. I had the freedom to try new things, a lot of collaborative interaction between different medical specialties with exchange of ideas, and a real culture of innovation. We had people like Dr. Starzl here already, and of course, I've enjoyed great support for family and colleagues that have really allowed me to devote my efforts to these activities. And of course, you need to be in a place with great resources, and UPMC has provided that. Now, not everybody can find an isolated mountaintop to do their great work, but we can sort of seek out our own environments that are more conducive to thinking and innovating. Oftentimes, this is a place of great natural beauty where we have time to reflect. But also just getting involved in what we call autotelic activities is a great way to think about things and solve problems. So activities such as driving a car, going for a walk or a jog, or bicycling, things that you don't really have to think about while you're doing them, are a great time to let your mind run and ruminate about problems. And even in your own microenvironment, you can personalize your space. The feng shui, create a nice environment in your office. Albert Einstein is shown in the picture here. He used to love to take walks with some of his scientific colleagues on the Princeton property, and this is a great way to have discussions and solve problems. Well, problems are everywhere. You just have to look. And I notice them every day in the hospital setting. And so every day I'm thinking about how can we do something better. And we often bring bioengineering students into our operating rooms, and we'll just have them observe and see what they notice. And it's good to have people come in outside of medicine because they will also see things in a different way. Here's another fascinating book by Donald Norman. He's known as the grandfather of the movement of design, modern design. This book, The Design of Everyday Thing, really looks at very simple things like ovens and doors, and looks at all the mistakes that people make in their design. So here you see 2 different doors, one that opens outwards, one that opens inward, and it's quite confusing just looking at the door design to know which way. In fact, he's given us so many examples of bad door design that they've named it the Norman door. So pay attention to that next time you're out. And if you want to really innovate, you've got to generate lots of ideas, but just choose only the best to pursue. I think Winston Churchill said this best: "You will never reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks." And so you really just want to have lots of ideas and just write them all down. You could keep a little memo pad. These days, you could just grab your phone and dictate a memo to yourself. When you have that period of insomnia at 3 in the morning, I keep a phone at the bedside for just that reason. And I keep a file on my computer desktop full of ideas for inventions or research ideas. And it's amazing how often you will go back to these things, even years later, and finally pick them up with a new insight. I regularly make pitches to bioengineering classes, and here you see a group of students who are working on a project with me. They just gave their presentation 2 days ago. And these are all the different projects I've pitched to them over the years. And so many of them are sort of dead ends and failures, but the first one has a patent, and the second one highlighted was a genesis for a company. So sometimes these take hold and really can change things. One of the wonderful things about innovation is you find these magical moments where you're in the flow. You're fully immersed in this energized focus on what you're doing. You totally ignore what's going on around you. There's no sense of time. It's great intrinsic motivation. And this book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is on creativity, talks about flow and how you can achieve it. So another good read. We often think of procrastination as being a negative thing. and you get in trouble for putting things off to the last minute. But actually, studies show that people do their best work when they do procrastinate. So, if you knock off a project as soon as you get the assignment, it's really not going to have the same level of creativity as if you let it sort of ruminate and in the back of your mind for a period of time. And then after your brain is actually working on it during all this time, and you'll end up with a better product when you actually sit down to finalize. So never put off till tomorrow what you can do the day after tomorrow. And procrastination gives you time to consider divergent ideas, to think in nonlinear ways, and to make unexpected leaps. So once again, Adam Grant, who has a lot of great material, there's a great TED Talk on the surprising habits of original thinkers, and my own contribution to the creative universe here. This is one of my favorite expressions that I learned during COVID. It's a Scottish term meaning to lounge in bed long after it's time to get up. Herkle Durkle. So this is also a great time. Just don't jump out of bed and start your day right away. Just lay there for a little bit. Think about your day. What's going to happen? What are things you need to work on? How you might solve some of your problems. In fact, there's sort of been a backlash against filling our lives with electronics and scheduling things every minute of the day, and that there is value in having downtime, bored time when you're not really doing anything, just letting your mind wander and daydream. It's amazing the insights you can have with this unstructured time. And I think we should avoid trying to fill our kids' lives with activities. There should be unstructured playtime. And we need to control our work time as well. We generally get trapped in box 3 here, things that are not important but urgent, and so we're putting out fires all day. And so you need to set limits. And so the Covey books are a great way to start if you want to learn about the time management techniques. And ideally, you'd spend all your time in the important boxes 1 and 2. There are inhibitors of innovation. It doesn't occur everywhere. Every institution has its own culture. Once again, I was very fortunate to be in an institution that had a culture of innovation and tolerated risk, and was very accepting of failure and receptive to change, where I could collaborate with other specialties. If you're really super specialized and working in a silo of one, you're really not going to have the interaction to innovate. You don't know what's going on around you. You're not going to be exposed to new ideas. You need resources. Sometimes there can be too much oversight and regulation, and that can stifle innovation. But we do need a proper balance for the safety of our patients. And so we need to modulate or manage our conflicts of interest. So, looking at my career as an example, my innovation journey, I wear a number of different hats. Within the surgical realm, I've innovated developing new surgical approaches and new surgical techniques. In research, my focus has been on understanding surgical cognition. How do surgeons interpret their visual environment? How do they perceive things? How can we improve their visual perception? And this will translate, I hope, into improved methods for surgical training. And then in recent years, ever since I got my MBA, I've become interested in entrepreneurship and developing medical devices. And I'm involved with 2 companies now with new medical devices. And so I just want to talk briefly about my startup company, Respire. And this is something that grew out of a problem I observed. There were problems with endotracheal tubes, with them moving in the airway, with them not functioning properly, and sometimes resulting in airway emergencies. And so I pitched the idea to a bioengineering class, and we started working on this together. I ended up being paired with Dr. Koyen, a cardiothoracic surgeon who is finishing his training at the time. And so we did a pivot. We decided that the biggest problem with endotracheal tubes is they don't prevent aspiration. And this results in what's known as ventilator-associated pneumonia. During the COVID pandemic, people didn't die from COVID. They died from the complications of COVID, getting pneumonia from being on the ventilator too long. And so we've come up with a new type of tube, a new design, very innovative change. Here you see Ross Beresford at the top, our CEO, displaying our new tube. And in the bright green pictures, you see a comparison of the existing tubes and our tube. The green stuff is infected material that would be trickling into your lungs, and you can see that a balloon cuff on a normal tube doesn't prevent that, and that's why you get pneumonia. Whereas our baffle design tube is very effective in preventing aspiration, and we hope will prevent ventilator-associated pneumonia. We're currently working towards FDA submission, so stay tuned. Also, as a department, we are very interested in helping surgeons develop their ideas. And so we have an entity called Pittsburgh Creates. And this really is a pipeline for surgical innovation. We've been very fortunate to have 2 new faculty join us. You may have heard from them already, Dr. Peter Santamaria and Dr. Mohit Singhalla. And they came from the Stanford Biodesign Group, which has really been the leader in the country in translational research and medical innovation. And so working together, we're helping to create a pathway that will help surgeons identify their ideas and translate them into products. And so we're using some new software to help us with this innovation process. There are 4 steps involved: inquiry, identify, invent, and implement. And you can enter this process at any stage. You can have no ideas for an invention or just a concept of an idea, or a very mature idea. And so our hope is to really help people through these early stages where there's often a lack of resources to get you started. The University of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh community is very good in supporting later stages of development. There's a very strong community of innovation support through the university. So, what are the take-home lessons? What do I get from all this? And, I must say that this is something that really adds a lot of joy to my career. It's one of the reasons I still come to work every day, that I love working with the people I work with, is because there is this opportunity for creativity, problem solving, discovering new things, trying out new things. And it's what there's still a lot of opportunities for flow in my work activities. So my take-home advice for you is be curious about everything. Really ask lots of questions and reject the status quo. Blow up those old ways of thinking. Try new experiences. Discover other domains. Go attend a class or try a new experience that you would never consider doing otherwise. Network both inside and outside of your own field to discover what other people are doing. Look for collaborators. Shape your space and control your time as well. Really create an environment that works for you, and look for opportunities to create flow in your activities. Another curious book on curiosity, where this author looks at individuals who are known for their innovative thinking, and really talks about their creative process. Well, sort of a last question to answer is, can we foster creativity? One thing we can do, of course, is to provide a good foundation for the creative enterprise. So adequate domain knowledge and technical expertise. We can help establish a creative environment, as we've talked about. But I guess the next level is really, can we select those individuals who are most likely to be creative? And so that begs the question, how do we measure creativity? And there actually are some personality characteristics associated with creativity, such as motivation to change and willingness to try new experiences. There are also some tests that allow you to measure someone's creative thinking. You give them these blank circles and say, okay, how many different ways can you make drawings using these circles? And so here you see some very innovative ideas. Here's another example. Choose one of these starts, and what can you make from that little squiggly? And finally, you could resort to psychedelics. It is said that we wouldn't have Silicon Valley if it weren't for the psychedelics that many of the founders of those companies were experimenting with. And if you probably remember Timothy Leary promoting the use of psychedelics. And there's a fascinating book by Michael Pollan on how to change your mind. And so there's been a rebirth of research into the use of psychedelics to treat medical illness, such as depression and drug addiction, but also using microdoses to just sort of improve our innovative potential. So something to think about. So I've shown you a lot of different sources for creativity and innovation. Here are some of my sources. If you have any particular recommendations, please share them with me. It's a lot of fun to learn about other areas. And at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Once again, thank you for attending my lecture. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Dr. Snyderman, thank you so much. That was very interesting. And I got so excited about your talk, I forgot to tell people, send in questions, but we already have a few. But I have one for you. You know, the Department of Otolaryngology at Pitt is renowned for training leaders of other departments across the country and across the world. Do you think that that creativeness has gone out to other institutions because of what happens here? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. In medicine, I sense a geographical difference
Okay.
in regions on innovation. I think sometimes the most radical innovations occur in sort of the breadbasket of America, in between the technology centers and the centers of the Ivy League schools,
Hmm.
because oftentimes you have a very rigid architecture, hierarchy that sort of stifles things coming up from the bottom. Innovation occurs from the bottom up. It does not occur from
Hmm.
the top down. You need leaders who create an environment such that it can percolate up from the bottom. But when I look at some of the leaders at the premier institutions across the country, they often came from your Midwestern or middle of the U.S. Universities. That's where they developed their expertise.
Well, that's so interesting. And, you know, the department under our leadership has trained, what, 37 chairs across the country. So hopefully some of this creativity has gone out. But let's get to these questions. Okay. Do government agencies such as the NIH and the NSF support these types of new innovations?
Yes, there are a number of programs that will fund early stage ideas. There's one called LifeX or Innovation Works, and you can apply for small grants. I've been a recipient of several of those with our startup company. And so these work through the local community. And so that's a great opportunity. The NIH also has what known as Small Business Innovation Research grants, SBIR grants. And these can provide larger amounts of money when you're at a more developed stage and have a company. This is money that goes to your startup company to help develop that. And once again, we've been the recipient of one of those grants. And then if you really have a far out idea, you might apply to the Department of Defense or DARPA, you know, sort of secret military technology. But they fund all kinds of strange ideas, things that might not have apparent military applications.
Black ops stuff.
Yes,
So,
exactly. So there is quite an infrastructure that's been built, and Evan Thatcher, who leads our Center for Innovation at the university, is a great source for sort of plugging people into these opportunities.
thank you. What qualities do you think Pittsburgh has that encourages these type of innovations? What could be better? Great one.
I talked a bit about these already. I mean, it's having the right leadership. You know, people who recognize the need for innovation and create an environment that supports it. Once again, having the resources and infrastructure so that you're not, you know, if you live in New York City, there's an added stress level of just trying to deal with everyday problems. And so that's not probably very conducive to innovation. Um, um, and I think we've always had a multidisciplinary culture here. And that was always stressed by my former chairs of the department. And I think you learn so much by interacting with people from other disciplines. I mean, everything I've done in my career has been through collaboration with other disciplines.
Very much so. So we had a question come in. How do you encourage aspiring surgeons to develop their creativity?
Yeah, I mean, first is to recognize that there are different types of creative personalities. I mean, don't feel bad if you're not an Einstein and don't have a great idea at this time. I would put myself in the experimental innovator category. I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing my best work late in my life. So it can happen at any time of your career. There's no rush. Um, Sometimes it's good to build a certain experience base before you get involved in these activities. So have
Mm-hmm.
10 to 15 years of clinical practice. That way, you know what the problems are, you're asking the right questions,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go in and be more effective, go back to school, get an MBA or get a master's in entrepreneurship. Those exist now. Many medical students are now combining medical with engineering degrees. And so
Mm-hmm.
they identify early on that they want to combine these activities, which is great. Um, and then, we're with our creates activities, we're putting the tools in place to help you in that early stage. And so we're going to be going
Mm-hmm.
around the surgical departments and identifying those individuals who have ideas, who are interested in helping them work through the process.
Thank you. So now we have some kudos for you before we get on to the next questions. Great talk. Thank you. One of our board members says, love all the book recommendations. You filled out my Christmas list. Thank you. So next question, is there anything on the horizon that you think could disrupt innovation in surgery? Something that may not be fully formed yet?
Well, I think AI, of course, is the big thing that's transforming all
Mhm.
disciplines. And I showed you briefly with that innovation tool. That's an AI-driven engine that is, using machine learning to help you with this whole innovation process. So now all you
Mhm.
have to do is say, I've got this problem. How do I solve it? And it's going to pull in the medical literature saying, okay, here's what we know about it already, and suggest some different avenues for investigation, tell you what the market potential is, which are most likely to be successful. So I think that's really going to spark a lot more innovation.
Thank you. Please repeat the name of the last book you recommended on creative individuals. I could not see the screen. She's visually impaired, so she just needs it repeated, please.
It's called Curiosity,
Curiosity.
and it comes in either a white or a black cover. The black one has a cat on the front.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Next question. How does a rising investigator balance creativity from frequent moves to spur networking versus staying in place to foster greater networking and benefiting from institutional memory?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's advantage in both. I mean, I've been fortunate to be at one institution my whole career and have fairly stable teams that, certainly in the surgical realm, allowed me to reach a higher level of success than I would if I had moved around and had to restart from scratch. But, these days, everybody's so connected through the internet.
Mhm.
I did a network analysis of one of our surgical societies and showed how interconnected we all are through publications and research. And so those barriers really don't exist anymore. You have access to anyone, anytime, pretty much.
Thank you. Aside from surgery, what kind of innovations have you seen in your field that could potentially help people in rural and impoverished settings?
Boy, well, innovation can occur at all different levels of healthcare. And so it could be a new way of delivering healthcare. And so a great
Mhm.
example of that is telemedicine. I mean, that
Mhm.
still seeing, we still haven't seen the limits of what telemedicine can do.
Mhm.
And it is certainly enhanced access to remote areas. We even have the capabilities to telementor surgeons halfway around the globe.
Mhm.
We've done that successfully, where we
Mhm.
monitor somebody operating and give them advice on how they can be a better surgeon, how to do something more safely, keep them out of trouble. And so I think we'll see more of that. You could even do remote telesurgery. We're not promoting that, but you could, control a robot halfway around the world. That's been done. Um, so I'm just off the top of my head, I think that's going to have the greatest impact is our ability to democratize healthcare, allow people in rural populations to have access to the experts wherever they are.
Thank you. We just had another one come in. What is the full name of the company with that provided tubing to help with aspiration? Will the tubing work with a CPAP? How can an individual get that tubing for their CPAP machine?
Well, you're talking about my company, the
Yes, I believe
Respire?
that's what the question is.
Yeah,
Yes.
so this is an endotracheal tube that's only used when you're on a ventilator. So it's not something that somebody would use with CPAP.
CPAP.
So this is
Okay.
only something when you can't breathe on your own and you need to be put on a ventilator temporarily, whether that's for surgery or because you're in the intensive care unit. But our respairemed.com is our website if you want to learn more about it.
Well, that is great. So thank you. This ends today's webinar, and it is the last otolaryngology webinar of 2024. We hope that you have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in 2025. And Dr. Snyderman, as always, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.